We've had a question about crabgrass growing into flower beds, and the reader wanted to know what the best way was to get rid of the crabgrass. And unless you want to use chemical herbicides like glyphosate or something, which kills everything, it is very difficult to get rid of them without digging. And so that's really your best bet once the grasses have started in your garden, is really to just keep digging with your trowel. I have the same problem, and so we just dig out all the roots as much as possible and just stay after it. One thing that does kind of help is to use crabgrass preventer, which prevents new seeds from germinating in your garden beds. And so there's crabgrass preventer, which you put down. Typically people put that on their lawns in the spring about the time the forsythias bloom. But I also like to use a germination inhibitor like Pruning in my garden, and there's a couple of options for that. There's the regular Pruning weed preventer, and then also there's an organic version of it, and you sprinkle that around, and you can do that anytime, and it just prevents any new seeds from germinating and new weeds from happening. And of course there's always mulch. Mulch is your best bet for preventing weeds from popping up in your garden. A good 1 to 3 inches of any kind of mulch will help you out.
Hi, we had a question from Katie about common daylily, which is Hemera callus fulva, and it's taking over an area of her yard and encroaching on peonies. So I could relate to that because I've had a big patch that I've been working to get rid of here in my yard. And it's a nice plant, it's really tough, but it just takes over. I mean, I even have it in the lawn in places, so that's how tough it is. So what I've done is, what you can do to get rid of it is, if you want to mow it down, I've kind of weed whacked an area here, and then you can put down some cardboard or black plastic mulch and sort of solarize or smother it, and that will help get rid of it. But if it's near the peonies, then you're going to want to dig it so that you don't damage the peonies. And that's what I'm doing here, because this patch here is a little closer to some shrubs and a hosta that I want to save. But this is what it looks like when you dig up a clump. You want to make sure you get all of the roots, because you can see how thick and beefy they are, and they break really easy. If you try to pull the foliage, it just breaks. These roots break really easily, and they'll just regrow from there. So that's the best way to get rid of common daylily.
Okay, so our next question is the best treatment for cane and leaf rust on a blackberry. So something you'll want to look for in cane and leaf rust is little yellow pustules that'll be on the underside of the leaf and then along the canes in the bark. They'll split the bark actually and kind of erupt from there. Not to be confused with orange rust, which is another very common thing on blackberries and raspberries, but it'll be a little bit more orange and it won't be in the canes. So look for that telltale sign on the canes. To control them, the best thing is for cultural controls. So after the blackberry's done fruiting in the summertime, cut those canes off and get rid of them. Any leaf or debris that comes off at the end of the year, make sure you've cleaned that up and bagged and disposed of it. If you've got the rust, definitely don't compost it. Just send it right out into the trash. And then if you can't get a hold of it that way and you need to use a fungicide, either go for lime sulfur or copper fungicide, or there's some other commercial brands of fungicides that you can spray on the foliage. But as with any chemical, make sure you read the label and follow the directions exactly according to how they recommend.
We had a question from a reader about weed trees, and all of us, I'm sure, find unwanted trees that have taken root in our flower beds. I have one right here. It's pretty common with Norway maple, buckthorn, black locust, tree of heaven, even oaks, where those acorns can set seed where you don't want them. Your best bet is to pull them up as soon as possible. The earlier the better, and you know what? You may want to water first or wait till after it's rained to try to pull them up, and do your best. And you know what? If you're not able to get it up, like I'm not able to pull this one up, you may want to, you have two choices then. You can cut it off at ground level and treat it with a herbicide, Or you can invest for less than $100 in a brush grubber, and it will grasp onto this and use leverage to pull out the entire tree all the way down to its roots. Those are about your best solutions when you've got weed trees in your garden.
So I've got a follower from our social media that asks, I'm in South Central Pennsylvania, Zone 6A, and I'm starting to learn about rosette disease. I think I found 2 that, or maybe 3 at work that I think are affected. They have the witch's broom and just sad appearance compared to the others in the same bed, but they don't seem to have the excessive thorns. So are there issues that mimic rosette, and are there stages to it? And like, would the excessive thorn growth show up later in the season? So actually, I would say those are pretty good guesses. You probably do have rosette. Common symptoms are that real proliferation of the reddish new growth. It's very soft. There will be a whole cluster of it. And usually there's excessive thorniness and yellow or deformed leaves. But you may not see that thorniness right away. It might be coming along later. And it might be cultivar specific. There might be cultivars that are more prone to having more thorns involved. So rosette is a virus spread by a teeny tiny little mite, and it's common on multiflora rose. So and it'll kill a rose plant in about 2 to 5 years. So if you do have it, bag that whole plant, stick a bag clear around so that you don't shake off any mites and have them spreading that disease anywhere else. Cut that rose off at the ground, dig it up, and dispose of all of the parts. Disinfect all your tools when you're done after that too. You can get some limited control with spraying with horticultural oil late in the fall, or late in the winter, excuse me, and removing dead canes and trying to control it that way. But it's really difficult. But the best thing to do is space your roses far apart so that the mites aren't as able to pass from one plant to another. Get rid of any infected plants, and eliminate multiflora rose that might be in ditches or property next to yours. Now, you did ask about are there other things that mimic it? Yes, and actually some herbicide damages can mimic rosette. Glyphosate and 2,4-D are 2 common herbicides that'll show damage in roses, but you'll get yellow narrowed leaves on the clusters and that witch's broom. It'll be a little bit different looking, and it'll grow out of it to some degree. Either it'll kill off that new tender new growth, or it'll grow out of it and you won't see it. Rosette, it'll stay that way the whole season and it'll look bad. But likely, it's very likely you've got rosette, and if that's the case, get rid of that rose and start over.
Our next question is about vining weeds and how you get rid of all the roots that are left in the soil when you pull the vine out. And I know what you mean. You know, sometimes you pull and it just snaps the roots right off at the ground level. And so that's why I always have a trowel with me, and I can dig down and get the rest of the roots, or even just start that way, because sometimes they have tap roots and that are really deep, and then sometimes they also have those kind of more fibrous roots that it just seems like there's always more in the soil, and that allows you to really dig that all out and kind of sift it through. The other thing that you can do is just continue weeding. So even if new growth comes up from the top, just snap that off, and every time you take away the top growth, it weakens the root system, and eventually, without any green growth on top, the root systems will die out.
So one person was asking us, how do I prevent slugs? And they are a real pain, but I don't know if you can really prevent them, but you can make it harder for them to feel comfortable in your garden. And so one of the things you can do is just, and it's a major thing, is just keep the debris picked up, because slugs like little hiding places, like under a pile of weeds that you pulled, or maybe even under some mulch. And using a finer mulch, I've met a lot of hosta enthusiasts who use a fine screened compost to mulch their hostas. Looks really good, and it doesn't give any places for the slugs to hide. So keep that debris picked up, and that will help. And if you do, maybe if you can't find the compost, you could use like a small pine bark nuggets. I've seen those in the bags at Home Depot or Lowe's. And be sure and keep it pulled back from the crown of the plant. That'll also help prevent disease. So you can do that. You can also grow some resistant shade garden varieties like a stilby or pulmonaria, hardy geranium, and some hostas, if you see them listed as having good substance, that means they have thicker leaves than other varieties. And some that I've had real good luck with are blue mouse ears, June, and Abiqua drinking gourd.
Okay, so Christine asks, what is wrong with this azalea? We'll show you a picture. We have lived here for 6 years and this is the best it's ever looked. Okay, so you'll see that there's a lot of scorching on the edges of those leaves, and it looks a little anemic and thin. It looks environmental to me, so, and several things can affect an azalea environmentally. So winter burn and drying winds will be one of your big things. If you've got it in an area that gets a lot of cold wind in the middle of the winter, you'll dry that plant out a little bit. So make sure you water it throughout the winter. If it looks a little like the soil's dry, you might want to use an anti-transpirant like wilt proof. Spray the foliage down with that. That'll keep the water from escaping those leaves, because they're large leaves. They're more likely to lose moisture in the wintertime than, say, a evergreen that has a needle. And then plant it in a more protected spot, either on the one side of a wall, on the opposite side of where your prevailing winds are going to go, or maybe plant other plants around it that'll help protect it. Secondly, sun scorch will do that to a plant. This doesn't quite look like sun scorch to me, because this is just mostly on the edges. Sun scorch will be a little bit more all over the foliage. But make sure you've got your plant in semi-shade, especially in the south or where summers are hot and dry, or plant another taller shrub to help shade it and protect it a little bit. And that can be sort of a dual duty with your winter burn. Same sort of conditions will help protect that azalea plant. Soil pH can also cause a little bit of burn like that, so make sure you're using an acid-loving fertilizer or acid-loving plants fertilizer like miracid. But be careful not to over-fertilize, because you can cause burn by giving it too much of a good thing. So water stress will cause a little bit of burning. If it's too dry, you'll lose moisture too fast and you'll get brown edges on the edges of the leaves. So make sure you check the moisture throughout the summer, a little bit in the winter time, and also being too wet will also cause the same thing. So if it seems like your soil is wet all the time, you might want to mound that plant up. You'll have to dig it up a little bit and get it up a little higher, maybe 6 inches above the rest of the soil, so that it drains a little better, or move it to a different spot where it gets where it's not so wet all the time. So, but from the looks of it, my opinion is it looks like winter burn, and it just needs to be a little bit more protected and get a little bit more water on it during the winter.
Hi, I'm Kristen with Garden Gate Magazine. If you enjoyed that video, be sure to subscribe to Garden Gate Magazine's YouTube channel. There you'll find tips, design ideas, and how-to help for gardeners just like you. Click the bell so you can be notified every time we upload a new video.